Hi, my name is Bibek Adhikari. I am an English instructor. In today's class, we are going to solve the writing portion of Unit 9, that is, writing a short story. So, let's begin. Alright, in this class, we will learn how to write short stories. So, what are short stories? To begin with, short stories are short works of fiction. And whenever we talk about fiction, we mean made up stories that are not true, stories that are all fictitious, and stories that do not really exist in real life, although they may have some reference in real life or may have some implication on real people. Correct? So short stories are short works of fiction, and fiction are made up stories. Short stories are highly imaginative, but short stories could also be based on realities. Sometimes they are based on realities too. But most of the time, when we are talking about short stories, we usually think about fantasies. We think about all the imaginative world and all the made up animals and plants and such characters in other world. We think about that whenever we think about short stories. So there are various genres, and according to genres, short stories are divided. It could be a real short story, a literary fiction, or it could be a fantasy fiction like Harry Potter. It could be something like, Harry Potter. It's not a short story though. We are talking about novels. Now, novels are bigger form of short stories. Short story is only a part, or more like a squeezed version of novel. Not exactly, but in a way. Alright, so before learning about, how to write short stories, we should learn some of the key elements of short stories. And there are indeed 5 elements of short story, and that we should study. The 5 elements of a short story. The 5 elements of a short story. So that is the topic, and we are going to study that now. The first element that we have is something called character. All short stories, they need characters. Without characters, short stories are impossible to write. You cannot write about anything without inventing characters. There has to be some character. It could be a single character short story, or maybe a many charactered short story, but there has to be some characters to make the story real. Now, who's a character? A character is a person, or sometimes even an animal. You must have written some of the short stories about crows, foxes, parrots, cats, rabbits, lion. And those short stories, in those short stories, the central character is always an animal. Now, these people, they take part in the action of the short story. So that is the main thing. When I ask you what do you mean by the word character, you can simply reply a character is a person, or sometimes even an animal, who takes part in the action of the short story. So that is the main thing, character. A character also try to achieve something in a short story. Characters, they usually take place in some kind of action, but indeed they are trying to achieve something. If you remember the story of Fox and the grapes, what is the fox trying to do? The fox is trying to get the grapes, right? And the fox tries to get the grapes many times, countless times he tries, but all the time he fails. And because maybe that is the reason why, he gives up his hopes, and in the end he walks away with bitterness in his heart. So characters, they try to achieve something. What do? They try to achieve something. Apart from that, short stories, they have a few characters, because this is not a novel, and we are not going to write about the history of a family or something like that. So short stories, they use few characters, and one character is clearly the central character. So we have a central character clearly, and this central character is clearly central to the story, with all major events having some importance to the character. And we have other characters called minor characters. In other words, we can say something like major characters. There are major characters and minor characters. We can define characters like that. Now, the major characters are again divided into 2 subheadings. Now, let's study that. So, if you think about, major characters, so now major characters are divided into 2 different categories. The first one is something called protagonist, and the second is something called antagonist. Protagonist is a hero or a heroine, while the antagonist is the villain or the vam. So villain is masculine, vam is feminine, hero is masculine, noun, heroine is feminine. So in major characters we have protagonist and antagonist. Protagonist, they are the positive characters. They have all the good qualities. They want something in life and they are trying relentlessly to get that thing. While antagonists are the negative characters, and these characters, they try to stop protagonist from getting what they are trying to achieve. So they are like wall, they try to stop protagonist. Let's say we have a hero and his name is Tom, and Tom is trying to get something in his life. Maybe he's trying to get some grapes, a bunch of grapes from a tree, the grapevine, let's say. Now Tom is a fox. Now we have an antagonist, and who's the antagonist? Let's say jealousy could be an antagonist, or maybe we have some other character. Let's say Alice, and Alice does not want Tom to get those grapes. Now Alice is acting as the vam, trying to stop Tom. That is the main idea. Protagonists, they want something in life. Antagonists, they want to stop protagonists. And that is how, a kind of clash, a kind of conflict is created in the story. And it is on that basis that stories survive. So there has to be some kind of conflict, in the stories. That is the main point. Now comes the second element of the short story, which is called setting. And the biggest question is, what's a setting? The setting of a short story is the time and place in which it happens. So it is the time and place where the story takes place. Authors often use description of landscape. Writers, they describe landscape, scenery, buildings, season, or weather to provide a strong sense of setting. So setting is indeed time and place. You cannot just always write once upon a time, and that would be very stupid. Because sometimes you have to give the exact time. You can say in 1990, June 25. And that's a very accurate setting if you ask me. Now, place. You cannot just say one distant village. Or what village? We don't know. So write, describe the landscape, talk about it. Share, about what you know about the landscape, the scenery around, the buildings, the season and weather. What's it like right now? What's the weather like? Is it raining? Is it cloudy? Is it dreary? Is it very sunny? So talk about those things. So, writing once upon a time in a distant village. Once upon a time in a distant village. And this would not do, once upon a time in a distant village. What? This is very vague. There has to be a strong sense of setting. And to create that strong sense of setting, one needs to be very specific. That is my point. Now we come to the third element of the short story, which is called plot. What's a plot? A plot is a series of events and character actions that relate to the central conflict. You see, there has to be some kind of central conflict, and plot is what relates to it. The plot has a beginning, a middle, and an end, but not always in that order. The short story usually has one plot, so it can be read in one sitting. So we have one plot. In short stories we have only one plot, so that it could be read in a single sitting. So what's a plot once again? It's a series of events unfolding, that goes on unfolding. It's a series of events and character actions, what characters actually do in the story, that relate to the central conflict. There has to be some kind of conflict. The folks trying to get the grapes and failing every time, there is the conflict. Short story should have a beginning, a middle, and an end. So starts from beginning, goes to the middle, and ends in the end. Traditional stories, according to Aristotle, that is very nice. But modern short stories do not always follow that order. Sometimes the end is shown in the beginning and followed by beginning and ending in the middle. Sometimes the stories begin in the middle, and such stories are called media res. So they do not play by this old rule. This is the old rule formulated by Aristotle. total. The great Greek philosopher said that stories would have a beginning, a middle, and end. Always follow that order, right? And there should be some kind of organic unity. The organic whole should be there to make it nice. And there should be a hero, the protagonist, and there should be some dramatic fall, stuffs like that. Aristotle said something like that. We are not going to talk about it. Let's go to the fourth element of the short story. The fourth element that we have is called conflict. What's a conflict? Conflict is a struggle. Needless to say, it's a struggle between two people or things in a short story. So it's a struggle between people or things. Sometimes people struggle with other people. Sometimes people struggle with things. I guess things do not struggle with things. That would be silly. So it's like this. We have a main character. This is our main character on the one side. And on the other side, there's something else. There could be another character, another main character, right? Another main character. Or there could be something else, something more abstract. Let's say forces of nature, a bit vague idea. Could be society, a character wanting to do something but society is stopping him. Or it could be feelings. The character's wanting to do something but his feelings interrupting. It could be emotions. It could also be some kind of illness. The character is trying to achieve something, but his illness is, holding him back. That could be one of the struggle, one of the conflict. Now, in conflict, we talk about a struggle. Life is full of struggles. So are short stories. Short stories are full of conflicts, full of struggles. If there would be no struggle, no conflict in a short story, there would be no point in reading or writing short stories. We want to read short stories so that we want to learn about the conflict. So it's like this. There's a wall in between and there are two characters. And two characters are fighting against each other, One character wants one thing and another character wants another thing. And they are fighting against each other. Or it could be slightly abstract. Let's say there could be a main character and the main character is fighting against the forces of nature. Or he could be fighting against society or feelings, his own feelings, emotions, illness. Sometimes people, they fight with their own emotions, own feelings. It could be something like that, I read a short story by Hanif Qureshi, and in that Intimacy and all the short stories, the book, the character is, fighting with himself. He wants to flee his own home. He wants to run away from his own home, and all the night he is thinking about it, in a way mulling over it, trying to decide what to do. In the end, he could not decide. In a way, he's trying to fight with emotions, and fighting with emotions is such a strong concept that has been used in short stories writing. Right, now let's go to the last element of the short story. The last element of the short story is something called theme. Now, writing teachers, they love this question. They always ask you, what is this story all about? And, every writing teacher, every English literature teacher will ask you this question. What is this short story all about? And you've got to answer that question. And that question is answered by the word theme. So what's a theme? A theme is the central idea or belief in a short story. So it is something that the author's underlying meaning or main idea that he is trying to convey. It may be, author's thoughts about a topic or some view of human nature. Now, what's a theme? It is the central idea or belief, the author's underlying meaning or main idea that he is trying to convey. Author's thoughts about a topic, or maybe belief. We all have got some kind of belief. I believe in something, you believe in something else. Now, writers, they constantly try to convey their beliefs. That is what separates bad writing from good writing. Bad writers have nothing to say. Good writers, they have so much more to say. They're trying to convey their belief. They're trying to sell something to you. It could be a simple story about fox and grapes, but good writers, they try to sell you something. They try to sell their readers something. They try to provoke something in their readers. But bad writers, my God, they have nothing to say. They just keep on rambling and rambling and rambling, and in the end, They do nothing but just produce bogus, fake words. All they could produce are words, empty, hollow words with no meaning whatsoever. And don't be a bad writer, because the world already has so many bad writers. Don't add the number. If you want to write something, be a good writer, write something good with a solid theme. Otherwise, don't even try. But that is the creative side. We are talking about a general 5 marks question here, so shouldn't be that difficult in exam. Now let's talk about something called plot line. This is very significant. We must understand the plot line, otherwise there's no point in writing a short story, because we should always learn the plot line. So I'm talking about something called linear short story, because linear short story is that short story where the story goes, in a linear way. We're not dealing with non-linear short story. So begins like this, goes up slightly here, goes down, ends like this. Let us name the parts A, B, C, D, E, and the end is F, right? The A to B part, this part is what we call exposition, while this E to F part is something called resolution. In other words, exposition is start of the short story, while resolution is the end of the short story. Correct? Very good. Now let's move on. This is something called rising action. What is it called? Rising action. The portion B to C is called rising action, while the portion D to E, clearly it's falling down, so it's called falling action. The number C is what we call crisis. Crisis. While number D is what we call conflict. There's not much difference between crisis and conflict. We use them almost synonymously. However, there's a slight difference between crisis and conflict. You see, this is how a story begins. It starts from A, goes to B. This is what we call the exposition, start, the beginning portion of the short story. Then action starts to build up, and slowly the story takes some height or climbs up from number B. The plot climbs up from number B to number C. This is what we call rising action. Number C is the point of crisis, a lot of tension. When a lot of tension is built up, it's going to explode. So explosion is there. So number C to D is what we call the crisis conflict line. And D to E, certainly the actions are falling down. Everything is, going towards an end. Finally, we know that the coveted resolution or the end is near. So number D to E is what we call the falling action. And from E to F, the story moves towards the end or the resolution. And that portion is what we call the resolution or the end of the story. Right. Now, if you're used to watching a lot of Hindi movies, a lot of Bollywood stuff, or maybe Indian soap operas, you would know that this is what, people like Ekta Kapoor, people like Karan Johar, they use all of the time and make millions of rupees, millions, right? So this is what they do. Listen. So if you're a great fan of Tamil movie or Telugu movie, you are going to be offended. No offense, but this is what happens. Number A, there's a boy, a very lonely boy walking by the sidewalks, in ragged clothes, looking at the sky and wondering about the vulnerability of life. Suddenly, he meets a girl, number B. The girl is rich, quite sexy and beautiful. The girl has everything that boy does not. And the boy falls in love now. And what happens? They start seeing each other. They start hanging out. They start, it's like two atoms colliding into one, bumping into each other, and bang, there's the explosion. Suddenly, love starts growing, and love is in the air. They go on dating, they go on flirting, and they reach to a point C. Unfortunately, the girl has a father. You see, fathers are the villains. Now, the father does not like the boy. The boy is merely a tramp. Why should anyone like him? The boy has nothing appreciable. So why should the father like the boy? There's no point in liking the boy. The father, in fact, hates the boy and calls some of his, trained goons to beat the boy. And there's a great amount of fighting going on. The boy beats the gundas beat the boy, and a lot of people die for no particular reason. And we come to point number D. Point number D is the inclination point from where the story moves in a downward slope. Now, oh my God, the father realizes now this boy is the real lover of my daughter, because he's been fighting with my trained gundas for so long and he has killed each one of them. Now I realize he is the real lover and I should give my daughter to him so that they would marry and be happy. That is where number E comes. The great realization, oh my God, I should do this. The father realizes. The villain turns out to be a hero. And number F is where they marry and live happily ever after. That is how, people write stories, people produce movies, Tamil, Telugu, and all that. Bollywood is produced based on this plot line. Pretty easy, right? Now, there's a short story in your book. It's called A Thirsty Crow. So that short story is pretty minimal and it's pretty straightforward. It begins with the line, "It was a hot summer day." That's a bad start. If you ask me, a crow was very thirsty. Who cares? That's a very bad short story given in your book that begins with the line, "It was a hot summer day." And the story is very minimal, and there's a moral also, where there is a will, there's a way. I believe you can do that, but don't just give your story a bad start. Try including the 5 elements here. Try including some dialogues here, Let's revise. What are the 5 elements? Character, setting, plot, conflict, and finally theme. By using all those 5 elements, I think you can improvise and write the story in a better way. You can always improvise the story that is given in your book, because whatever it is given, it is very crappy. Let me be very honest. Right? That's the point. And don't forget to include the dialogues. Dialogues are very significant. Now we come to something called the homework section, something you may not like, but I love giving people homework, especially you. Right. Your homework is rewrite the short story that is given in your book by using all the 5 elements properly. So that is your homework. Pretty easy. All you have to do is remember the 5 elements and use them judiciously or properly. That's your homework. With this, we come to end of today's class. If you have any questions or suggestions regarding this video series, don't be shy and feel free to write us at learning@deerwalk.edu.np. Thank you.